They mocked her accent, her clothes, and her job, all in French, thinking she wouldn't understand. But what they didn't know was that the waitress they humiliated would soon own half the company. And when she walked into that boardroom, their laughter died faster than their pride. If you've ever been underestimated or mocked for where you came from, stay till the end. This story will make you believe in poetic justice. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder. Class isn't about money, it's about character. It was one of those afternoons when the sunlight poured through the cafe windows like liquid gold, catching every swirl of steam rising from freshly brewed coffee. The hum of quiet conversation, the clatter of cups, and the soft rhythm of footsteps filled the air. Behind the counter stood Claire, a 28-year-old waitress with calm eyes and a tired smile. The kind that hides both grace and exhaustion. She had been on her feet for 8 hours straight, yet her movements were steady, her words polite. Every order was served with quiet dignity, every smile offered without expectation. The door chimed, breaking her rhythm. A man and a woman entered, the kind of couple that drew attention without even trying. The man wore a tailored charcoal suit, his confidence almost theatrical. Ethan Harrington, billionaire CEO of Harrington Enterprises. The woman beside him, Vanessa Brooks, was a vision of poise and arrogance, a fashion influencer whose beauty was matched only by her disdain for anything ordinary. As they approached their reserved table, heads turned. Their laughter was the type that filled rooms, and occasionally bruised egos. Claire approached their table, notebook in hand, her tone soft but professional. "Good afternoon. Welcome to Café Lumière. What can I get you today?" Vanessa didn't look up. She glanced at Claire's uniform, simple black with a faint coffee stain near the cuff, and smirked. "I'll have the truffle risotto," she said dismissively, turning back to her phone. Ethan leaned back, studying Claire as though she were part of the decor. "And you?" Claire asked him. He smiled thinly. "Just espresso." "Double, strong." Like success, Vanessa giggled, brushing a manicured hand over his sleeve. They began to whisper in French. Not quietly, not discreetly, but with the deliberate cruelty of people who assumed others wouldn't understand. "Regarde-la," Vanessa murmuró con una carcajada. "Tellement banal. Même sa posture crie pauvreté. Look at her, so plain. Even her posture screams poverty." Ethan chuckled, replying, "Elle essaie d'avoir l'air digne, c'est presque mignon. She tries to look dignified, it's almost cute." Claire froze for half a heartbeat, the faintest flicker of emotion crossing her face. Not shock, but disappointment. Her eyes lowered as she jotted down the order, hiding the quiet storm beneath her calm expression. She placed their meals with composure, even as their laughter echoed. To everyone else, she was just a server doing her job. But inside, she was memorizing every word, every sneer. When the bill came, Ethan tossed a few bills on the table, not enough to cover the meal, and said, "Keep the change, sweetheart. Maybe buy yourself a better uniform." Vanessa laughed again, a brittle, high-pitched sound that made heads turn. Claire met his gaze then, steady, unflinching. "Merci, monsieur," she said fluently, her French crisp and precise. For the first time, their faces paled. As they walked out, their laughter faltered. Claire stood still, her hand resting on the edge of the table. Beneath the quiet murmur of the cafe, she whispered softly in French, "Un jour, ils apprendront." One day they'll learn. And in that small cafe, among half-empty cups and fading laughter, a promise was made. Not of revenge, but of return. Long after the cafe had emptied and the tables were wiped clean, Claire sat by the window with a cup of tea gone cold. The laughter from earlier still echoed faintly in her memory. Not because of its sting, but because it reminded her of how far she'd fallen from where she once was. To most people, she was just another waitress in a small-town cafe, but behind her quiet eyes lay a story that began thousands of miles away, in a city that once felt like home. Paris. Years ago, Claire had walked those cobbled streets, not as a waitress, but as a scholar. She was studying international business at one of France's most prestigious universities, fluent in both the language and the culture. Her professors called her brilliant, a strategist with a poet's soul. She was building her future with ambition and grace, balancing books and dreams in equal measure. But dreams, she'd learned, can crumble faster than they're built. When her father fell gravely ill back in the States, she didn't think twice. She left behind her thesis, her career prospects, and a life of potential to come home and care for him. By the time he passed, the savings were gone, and so was her sense of direction. Jobs were scarce, tuition was overdue, and she found herself standing behind a cafe counter, serving people who never looked her in the eye. But Claire never stopped learning. Between orders and closing shifts, she scribbled notes on napkins, sketches of an idea that had followed her from France, a hospitality management platform that could connect small cafes and restaurants to investors in ethical supply chains. She called it élan, a French word meaning momentum. It was meant to help people like her, the invisible workers who kept the world running but rarely received credit. One evening after finishing her shift, Claire attended a small business workshop at the community center. The speaker, Professor Jameson, was an old mentor from her university days who happened to recognize her in the audience. "Claire Whitmore?" he said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" She smiled faintly. "Still chasing dreams. Just a little differently." After the event, he looked over her notes. "This idea," he said, tapping the page, "is brilliant. You've built something sustainable, something global. Why haven't you pitched it yet?" Claire hesitated. "Because no one takes a waitress seriously, Professor." He smiled kindly. "Then stop being one in their eyes. Enter the National Entrepreneurship Contest next month. Let them see the mind behind the apron." That night, Claire lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling. The memory of Ethan and Vanessa's laughter came back, not as pain, but as fuel. She realized that their mockery had reignited something in her, the hunger to prove that dignity and intelligence couldn't be dressed in uniforms or silenced by arrogance. The next morning, she filled out the application for the contest. Her hand trembled slightly, but her heart didn't. She hit submit and whispered under her breath, "This time, they'll remember my name." Outside, the rain began to fall, soft, steady, cleansing, as if the universe itself was washing away the remnants of humiliation and preparing her for the rise that was yet to come. The day of the competition arrived like the dawn after a long storm, quiet, hesitant, and full of promise. Claire stood backstage among other contestants, clutching a small folder filled with her notes and dreams. The room buzzed with nerves and ambition. Most of the participants were graduates from elite business schools, their suits pressed and confidence rehearsed. Claire wore a simple navy dress, her hair tied neatly, and carried herself with calm humility. She had no entourage, no sponsors, no polished accent, only conviction. When her name was called, she took a slow breath and stepped into the spotlight. The panel of judges looked expectantly toward her, waiting for another predictable pitch about profits and market shares. But Claire began differently. "I used to serve coffee," she said softly, her voice steady but intimate. "But while I served people, I also listened to their complaints, their frustrations, their struggles. And I realized the hospitality industry doesn't just need efficiency, it needs empathy." She then unveiled Elan, her platform designed to connect small businesses with investors who valued ethics and fair wages. She explained how it would track transparency, sustainability, and worker welfare, blending technology with human understanding. Halfway through her presentation, she switched languages seamlessly, continuing in French for an international investor on the panel. The room went silent, not out of confusion, but awe. Her confidence wasn't loud. It was magnetic. When she finished, there was a pause. Then came the applause. Slow at first, then thunderous. One of the senior judges, an investor named Mr. Lambert, leaned forward and said, "Miss Whitmore, this is not just innovation, it's revolution." He offered his hand. "We'd like to fund your startup, under one condition. You must partner with a major corporation to scale it globally." Claire's heart skipped. A partnership could change everything. She accepted, not realizing fate was already weaving irony into her story. A week later, the official email arrived. The chosen corporate partner was Harrington Enterprises, the same company run by Ethan Harrington, the billionaire who once mocked her in that cafe. When she read the name, she didn't flinch. She simply closed her laptop and smiled faintly. "So this is how life balances its books," she whispered. Instead of anger, she felt an odd serenity. She didn't need revenge. She needed results. Over the next few weeks, Claire built her company from scratch. She worked long nights, refining her business model and overseeing every design detail. Her small apartment turned into a command center filled with sticky notes, whiteboards, and coffee cups. Every setback became motivation. Every doubt turned into fuel. She didn't chase validation anymore. She was building her own power. By the time the partnership meeting was scheduled, Claire was no longer just a waitress with a dream. She was the founder of a rising company, the kind that people whispered about in boardrooms. And as she prepared her final presentation for Harrington Enterprises, she thought about that afternoon in the cafe. The laughter, the arrogance, the humiliation. It no longer hurt. It inspired, because she knew that the next time Ethan Harrington saw her, he wouldn't be laughing. He'd be listening. The morning of the meeting felt different, not because the air outside was colder, but because Claire carried herself like a woman who finally understood her worth. Gone was the simple navy dress. Today she wore a crisp white blouse and a tailored black blazer. Her heels clicked with quiet authority as she entered the towering glass building of Harrington Enterprises. The same logo that once adorned the credit card of a man who mocked her now hung above the doors of her destiny. Inside the boardroom, the air buzzed with tension. Ethan Harrington sat at the head of the long mahogany table, surrounded by executives and investors. Vanessa was there too, dressed in a designer suit, her expression sharp and polished. The perfect reflection of the world that believed money excused cruelty. Ethan leaned back in his chair, radiating the same confidence that once made waiters flinch and interns stammer. To him, this was just another partnership meeting. He didn't know the storm that was about to walk through his door. When Claire entered, the reaction was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Ethan's confident smirk faltered for the first time. Vanessa blinked, confusion etched on her face before recognition dawned. "Wait, you," she breathed, her voice thin and disbelieving. Claire's expression was calm, almost kind. "Good morning," she said evenly, placing her folder on the table. "I'm Claire Whitmore, founder and CEO of Elan Global. I believe we're here to finalize the partnership proposal." Her tone was professional, her composure flawless. She didn't need to remind them where they'd met before. Their silence did that for her. Ethan recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "Small world, isn't it?" From cafe tables to board tables, his words were meant to sting, but they landed flat. Claire smiled faintly. "Yes," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Though I must admit, I prefer serving solutions now instead of coffee." The room stirred with restrained amusement. The investors exchanged intrigued looks as Claire began her presentation. Her voice was steady, her slides sharp, and her ideas transformative. She outlined how Elan would revitalize Harrington Enterprises' struggling image, rebuild trust with employees, and attract global investors through ethical practices. As she spoke, the power dynamic shifted. The same woman they once saw as beneath them now commanded the entire room. Every sentence she spoke was precise, confident, and impossible to dismiss. Ethan's charm began to crack, replaced by a flicker of unease. Vanessa crossed her arms, glaring, as if trying to burn holes through Claire's calm exterior. When the presentation ended, the lead investor stood. "This partnership," he said, "is the smartest move Harrington Enterprises has made in years." Miss Whitmore's vision as the future applause filled the room. Genuine, enthusiastic, undeniable. Claire turned to Ethan, extending her hand. "Welcome to Elan's future," she said softly. "I trust we'll treat each other with more respect than we did in the past." For a moment, Ethan didn't move. Then he stood, his handshake hesitant, his pride fractured. Vanessa looked away, humiliated by the quiet grace that now filled the room. As the meeting ended, Claire gathered her things. Ethan tried to recover with a faint smile. "You've changed," he said. She paused at the door and looked back. "No," she replied gently. "I just stopped letting people decide who I am." And with that, she left the boardroom, leaving behind the same silence that once followed her in a cafe, only now it sounded a lot like respect. When the boardroom doors closed behind her, Claire didn't linger on the applause or the shifting stares that followed her. She had learned long ago that true power didn't need an audience. It simply existed, quiet and unshakable. But inside that room, another kind of silence was unfolding. Ethan and Vanessa sat frozen as the investors began murmuring among themselves, papers shuffling, contracts being reviewed with new urgency. Something had changed, and they didn't yet know what. Moments later, the lead investor, Mr. Lambert, cleared his throat and said, "Before we finalize, I believe there's a detail Mr. Harrington should be aware of." Ethan straightened in his chair, trying to regain his composure. "And what would that be?" he asked, his tone confident but cracking at the edges. Lambert adjusted his glasses. "Under the acquisition terms, the majority controlling shares of this joint venture will be held by Elan Global, meaning Miss Whitmore will not only be your partner, but your superior in company hierarchy." The room went still. The sound of Vanessa's bracelet clinking against the table was the only movement in the air. Ethan blinked, confusion shifting to disbelief. "That can't be right," he muttered, glancing at the documents. But the proof was printed in black and white, stamped and signed. Claire's company now held 60% of the voting rights. When Claire returned moments later to collect her notebook, she noticed their pale faces. "Something wrong?" she asked softly. Ethan forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You planned this," he said quietly, accusation laced with shame. Claire's tone remained steady. "No, I prepared for this." She met his gaze, calm but unyielding. "You once taught me that power is everything. I just learned to define it differently," Vanessa scoffed. "You think this makes you better than us?" Claire looked at her for a long moment. "No, just freer." Turning to the board, she concluded the meeting herself. "From this day forward, Harrington Enterprises will operate under transparent, ethical standards. Every worker deserves dignity, whether they're in a suit or serving a table." No one argued. No one dared. As she walked out, the whispers followed her, admiring, stunned, respectful. Ethan slumped back in his chair, the weight of irony pressing down on him. The waitress he once mocked hadn't just earned a seat at his table. She now owned it. Weeks turned into months, and the ripple of that meeting transformed into a wave that swept through the entire company. Under Claire's leadership, Harrington Enterprises no longer resembled the cold empire it once was. The sterile hallways, once filled with fear and formality, began to hum with purpose. Employees who had once been silenced found their voices again. Policies changed. Fair wages, safe conditions, and education programs were introduced. Claire had turned the company from a symbol of greed into a force for integrity. News outlets praised the transformation. "The waitress who rebuilt a billionaire's empire," one headline read. But Claire didn't chase the spotlight. She focused on the work. She believed true power wasn't about control, it was about responsibility, and she wielded it with quiet conviction. Ethan, on the other hand, struggled with humility. The man who once commanded rooms with arrogance now found himself taking direction from the very woman he had once dismissed. Every meeting became a lesson in grace. Claire didn't humiliate him, she simply held him accountable. She offered him a position as a senior advisor, a title stripped of glory, but rich in meaning. "If you truly want redemption," she told him, "then help rebuild what you once broke." For the first time in his life, Ethan listened. He arrived early, worked late, and watched as the employees who used to fear him began to trust Claire. He realized leadership wasn't about dominance. It was about example. And the more he watched her, the more he understood that she had never needed revenge. She had simply chosen evolution. One evening, as the office lights dimmed, Ethan approached her. "You could have ruined me," he admitted quietly. "But instead, you rebuilt me." Claire looked at him, her expression calm but resolute. "You didn't need to be ruined," she replied. "You needed to remember." Outside, the city shimmered under the streetlights, a reflection of renewal. The company was thriving, and so was Claire. Yet she remained grounded, visiting the same cafe every Friday, greeting the staff by name, tipping generously, never forgetting where she came from. She had walked into the lion's den once powerless and left it as a woman who changed not just a company, but the man who once embodied its cruelty. The turn of power wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, and absolute, just like her rise. The sun spilled over the city in soft gold as the day of the grand press conference arrived. The moment when Harrington Enterprises would unveil its new vision under Claire's leadership. The world had been watching the company's transformation with fascination. Investors called it the comeback no one saw coming. But for Claire, it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about keeping a promise she made to herself in that cafe long ago, to never let humiliation define her worth again. She stood backstage adjusting the microphone pinned to her blazer. Her reflection in the mirror caught her attention. The woman staring back wasn't the weary waitress she once was. Her eyes held confidence, not defiance. Calm strength, not bitterness. Behind her, Ethan entered quietly. His expression was solemn, not proud. "They're all here for you," he said softly. "You earned this." Claire nodded. "We all did," she replied. "Even you." When she stepped onto the stage, the room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, and the crowd hushed as she began to speak. "When I first entered this industry," she said, her voice steady and warm, "I was invisible. People saw a uniform, not a person, but every worker, every dreamer, every so-called nobody, they are the heartbeat of progress. Today, this company stands for them." Her words resonated deeply. Ethan, watching from the sidelines, felt an ache in his chest. Not of regret alone, but of realization. This woman had become everything he once pretended to be. Visionary, respected, human. After the conference, Claire visited Café Lumière once more, the same place where her story had begun. The tables were different, the air lighter, but the memory was still there. Laughter, humiliation, and the quiet promise that followed. She ordered a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the world go by. A young waitress approached nervously, fumbling with her tray. Claire smiled gently. "Take your time," she said kindly, helping her steady the cup. The girl looked relieved. "Thank you, ma'am." Claire smiled, gazing out at the city. They once mocked a waitress, she thought, but I was never serving food. I was serving lessons. Outside, her reflection shimmered in the glass. A woman who had turned pain into purpose and mockery into meaning. Karma hadn't just come full circle. It had taken her hand and bowed.